In today's video, we're going to actually take a look at some of the plays that the Pistons had in their recent game against the Indiana Pacers. This was the third game of the year. They had won one, they had already lost one, and this was a game that they definitely were expected to be hyper competitive in and potentially even win. And so they did not win the game, and there's a couple things I want to take a look at in this video about what I'm seeing early in the season, some patterns that I've seen over the first few games, and areas for this team to improve. So with that, we're going to go into a screen share here. There are three main themes that I'm going to be looking at. The first one that we're going to be looking at is the defensive rebounding. In this play, you'll see a great example of what I'm talking about. This is a situation where it's off of a fast break, and then the first shot is missed, and then there's an offensive rebound by one of their guards, who then is able to kick it around for a score. So let's take a quick look together. You can see the drive by Tyrese Halliburton, the kick out, the miss, the rebound by Halliburton, and then over here, a good play from Duarte. Now let's go back just a split second to right over here. This is right when Goga Bitadze took that three. First of all, he's a great player to let take a three. He doesn't have the greatest percentage. He's a big man, etc. Although I was actually surprised by how many threes he was taking this game. But you can see there's a good contest. The ball is in the air right now. And you can see near the perimeter there are three Pistons. There's only one Pacer down low. Then over here is Tyrese Halliburton, who just came off the shot. You have this guy who's running up and out. I don't know exactly what his play is, but I'm guessing he's rotating around and trying to get up the court possibly. And so when you look at this, you think, okay, these players will box out. This guy will come down and compete for the rebound. But instead, what we see here is that as mentioned, there's only two Pacer players down here. However, with three Pistons there, they get the offensive rebound, and then from there are able to have a player do an ISO with a good move for a score. And that was pretty solid defense. It was just a better move from Duarte. But the big problem here is that they didn't box out, they didn't defensive rebound, and it gave up the play. Let's take a look at another example. Over here we can see another play. What you'll see is a corner three, usually known to be a long rebound. And you can see that to outline the play, if you look at the top, you see the Pacers player who's fading towards the corner. You see down low, there's a center being guarded by a guard, which is obviously a problem. It's a bigger guard, Killian Hayes, but obviously he's guarding somebody who's got a lot of weight as well as 5 inches and a lot of athleticism on him in Isaiah Jackson. So what ends up happening here is that this is because of there was likely a switch on defense earlier, which it can happen. It's not the biggest deal. But let's look at what happens here with the rebound. Especially if you look here, you can see on the perimeter that a lot of these players are all outside, which means that if there is going to be somebody to collapse to a rebound, then you can rotate pretty well because people aren't out of position. The shot goes up, it's missed, it's rebounded, and then there's an and one. Obviously a great play by Isaiah Jackson. Obviously there's some of the defensive mismatch coming from a switch earlier in the play, but at the end of the day, there was minimal defensive effort on that play. Let's see if I can get back to when the shot was in the air. Right over here, you can see these players are ready to kick out, even though they have a known really athletic rebounder down in the middle. Saddiq Bey did a pretty good job coming up, but you see also Isaiah Jackson's not really boxed out. And I actually believe that was Cade before, not Killian Hayes. That's my mistake. But you can see there's actually no box out happening here. Isaiah Jackson basically is able to rely fully on his athleticism rather than having to go up and over somebody to get the rebound. So again, we have that issue. The next theme that we're going to talk about is actually one of a lack of adjustment, but specifically the Pistons continually driving through heavily congested areas. I mean, Indiana has two really athletic big men in the rotation, and that's even with Miles Turner being out. And so what we saw earlier in the game was a fair amount of blocks. I think it was 12 blocks in the first half. It was a pretty significant number. But what we started to see in the second quarter, and I'm just pulling these highlights from what's posted, which is basically all the scoring plays. So I can't really show every single play where this happened, but I'll try to show a couple examples of it happening. And what we saw happening was that there was a lot of ISO ball. I will do my best to show you an example here of the kind of motions that were being ran, and then from there we can take a look at what happened and what some possible adjustments might have been. So on this play that we have over here, pause, you can see that the ball carrier is at the top left. He's in motion. His name is Bogdan Bogdanovic. He's a great three-point shooter. He's a very experienced player. He's actually a pretty skilled playmaker as well. Now, what you can see is next to him, to his left, is Isaiah Stewart, who's facing towards the basket. What they just ran was likely a dribble handoff. The ball was passed to Isaiah Stewart. From there, Isaiah Stewart hands it off to Bogdanovic, who's coming behind him, and then Bogdanovic is able to go downhill towards the rim. Pretty standard motion, and this is an example earlier in the game. So this is the Pistons running their regular game plan, and then what I'll show is later in the game how the same kind of play had the same kind of result. And since I don't have the plays that didn't work, you're just going to have to recognize that this was happening throughout the entire game. These very quick motion rubs and handoffs, etc., they were very early in the shot clock. You can see here it's 15 seconds into the shot clock. It's not a bad motion, but when there are two really dynamic athletic shot blocking bigs down low who for the entire first half have been blocking you on those kind of ISO motions or dribble handoff or quick rub screen motions, which leads into a kind of isolation style play, well, we saw that wasn't really working. So let's take a look here. This is earlier in the game. This is, as you can see, just in the first couple minutes. And Bogdanovic drives, gets blocked, and that leads to a fast break for the Pacers. So, it's not a bad play. The idea of it, the structure of it is actually pretty solid. When you go over here, you can see Bogdanovic is coming downhill. You can see that there's one big man who maybe possibly would be drawn out by Isaiah Stewart, or potentially they think maybe he's quicker, etc. You can see there's another player over here. This looks like a guard guarding Corey Joseph, the one who's deep in the paint, as well as another guard forward and Buddy Hield shading inwards on the bottom of the screen. So it's not a bad motion, but what happened throughout the game is these kinds of motions were stopped. Let's take a look at a play in the second half where the same thing was happening. So what we'll see in this play, Cade, who had a great game, a lot of the Pistons' young players had good games, but these are the kinds of things that need to be tightened up when game planning for competitive games, which really in the NBA every night can be a competitive night. And so what we're going to see here is at the top of the screen, you can see number 2, he's kind of blurry, who has the ball, he's bringing it up across half court. What you'll see is he's going to basically bring it up across half court. From there, he is going to quickly assess the floor, and very early in the shot clock, he's going to drive and try to kick it to his big man, Isaiah Stewart. Let's see how that works. As you can see, there was no motion, there was no movement, nobody was off guard. Their defense was able to quickly collapse. Now take a look right over here. You can see their defense is starting to collapse. Now obviously their center, Isaiah Jackson, makes a great play. He doesn't shade too much. Their guard makes another great play, Tyrese Halliburton cutting in. But at the same time, this is because of the fact that there wasn't a lot of motion, there wasn't a lot of movement, there wasn't any mismatch hunting or mismatch creation with the screen. It's basically one player putting his head down, and a very good player at that, Cade Cunningham, putting his head down and saying, I'm going to get to the basket. But the problem is this team has already blocked your team 12 times, if not more at this point, because it's already in the second half. You can see at the bottom, it's in the third quarter. So what we know about this team is, and they're a young team and they're developing, so we might not have known this coming in, and that's okay. But what we now know about this team is if that we just put our head down and drive, the odds of us getting blocked are pretty high. And this was happening throughout the entire game. Now, the last thing that we're going to look at is decision-making and playmaking, as well as ball handling. What we'll see in this example is, first of all, a young player, Jaden Ivey. He's a rookie. There is obviously, he's only his third game in the NBA. There has to be an understanding that these kinds of things are going to happen. However, this this pattern, and what I'm going to point out is, and we saw it actually in the last play with Cade as well, where the players aren't really recognizing the amount of defensive help that they're playing into. We saw it on the last play where Cade tried to ISO, and the defense collapsed. It was early in the shot clock, and that was something where it was just an unnecessary play. There was tons of time to set up a screen, to settle into a half-court offense, to get some motion, to get some ball switches moving, so that the dynamic duo of Cade, with his size, with his length, with his physicality as a guard, could take advantage of a wing player or a guard or potentially even a big man with his foot speed, and then obviously with Jaden Ivey potentially getting him into a one-to-one matchup on the perimeter with a big man where he could blow by them every single time with his speed. In this example, we're going to actually see, though, how that impacts other areas, and we're going to take a look at this, what is actually a motion that I really, really love, and I think the Pistons need to do more of this, but what I really want to emphasize is the decision-making when we see these players go into areas where there's a significant amount of help defense. Let's take a look at this play together. So you can see in the middle of the screen is Jaden Ivey with the basketball. He's basically right before the Indiana Pacers half court. You can see he's bringing the ball up, and what you're going to see ahead of him a little bit is Isaiah Stewart, who is one of the big men on our team. Isaiah Stewart is going to set a pick for him, and then Jaden Ivey is going to actually run a great motion, and this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit, and I'll try to pause it and point it out. He's going to run a motion that I actually want to see the team run a lot more, but then when Jaden Ivey gets the defensive help stepping up, you'll see that rather than potentially slowing down a little bit or potentially just reading the floor a little bit better, it just goes into a turnover. And this is something that is going to happen with younger players, so I don't want to be too harsh on it, but this is, again, an area that can be cleaned up. Now, the reason why I'm really emphasizing this, though, is because a lot of Pistons fans are frustrated with the defense, and what we're looking at here are three different areas that their offense and their rebounding is actually making their defense have to work too hard. Now, obviously, there's a lot of missed rotations. Casey is running a lot of switches. There's some mismatches on defense that are happening because of that, and there are conversations that can be had about that as the season progresses. We're not talking about that in this video because what we're talking about are the easy, simple to clean up things that can be fixed early in a season so a scheme can actually be measured based on the merits of the scheme, not the young mistakes that the team is making. So let's take a look at one of those young mistakes here. This is Jaden Ivey, an incredible player. So he brings it up past half court. Isaiah Stewart sets the screen. And then you could see right over here, he's in the middle of running into contact, and it ends up being a turnover. Let's go take a look over here, because this is what I'm talking about the motions that I love. So you can see at the bottom, the shot clock has 20 seconds left. Jaden Ivey is right across the half-court line. He's already getting a high pick and roll from Isaiah Stewart. This is the kind of motion where once a point guard or a guard comes off of this play, or even a wing in today's NBA comes off of this kind of play, you want to pause for a split second and read what the defense is doing. If the defense is stepping up, well, then you might want to look for where there's space, or potentially if they're stepping up a significant amount, you might want to notice where the open player is. Like over here on this play, if you look, there's Jaden Ivey about to take the screen from Isaiah Stewart, and he takes it well. But you can see two of their big men, Jalen Smith right here and Isaiah Jackson right here, are both and they're both on the bottom left-hand part of the screen. You can see both of them are up on the perimeter. They're being drawn out, which is actually one of the things I really like about this kind of play. It draws the big men out. But you can also see that the other guard over here, I believe this is Buddy Hield, I could be wrong, at the top of your screen, is also shading in. Now, what could happen is, if he shades in too much and you come off the screen, you might have a shooter in the corner. You can see Cade is running to that corner right now. If that happens, and the guy over here has shaded in too much, if Cade's defender has shaded in too much, well, then you might have a rotation where the person down low might have to make a decision, and I actually believe at the top that's Bogdanovich, but might have to make a decision about going to guard the three-point shooter, who's a proven three-point shooter, or leaving the person down low, which is Cade. And then from there, you can make a pretty straightforward pass. You force the big men to step up. Your wing player is still running up the court, so that guy has to stay up as well. You could potentially get this guy over here to commit, and then you kick it to Bogey or Cade, whichever one Tyrese Halliburton, who's a guard, chooses. But that's not what happens. Let's take a look. You see Ivy runs directly into Isaiah Jackson, who's has very quick foot speed. He's extremely athletic, and he's been blocking everything that's been going downhill. So this basically goes from rather a motion play. This just suddenly becomes an isolation play, where one of the best players loses all of his athletic edge because he's completely walled in. Now these are the kinds of things that are not that hard to fix. It's a pause after coming off a pick and roll. It's a commitment to bring that extra guy and properly box out one defensive rebound. It's a commitment to run those plays early in the shot clock, just like I was talking about here with the high pick and roll, which obviously turned into a negative play. But the action of getting into that high pick and roll at 20 seconds left on the shot clock, you have a full 20 seconds left to run a motion, get a guy running downhill, make somebody react, move the ball around, and force somebody to make a decision when you have the ball swinging from one side of the court to the other. That's when the easy baskets happen, especially in the half court. But what we see is, and a lot of this is just due to it being a younger team, what we see is that these small things end up having, again and again and again, we see here, with the offensive rebounds that they gave up to the Pacers, what we see is that they get another shot. Well, guess what? Your defense is out of position. You have to rotate, and you end up being in a position where it's just not that great for your defense. You're obviously going to be more likely to give up a play off of an offensive rebound. The same thing with these two different turnovers that we took a look at. The first one where it was because early in the shot clock, I think that one was about 15 seconds left, which is still relatively early in the shot clock. We saw one of the guards, I believe it was Cade, come up and immediately go into an ISO into the paint and try to kind of bulldoze his way through. Instead of recognizing that they had a bunch of time, that they could slow down, they could run something like that high pick and roll, they could get a defensive mismatch, they could swing the ball around, and then from there they could still have significant amount of time to take a shot and potentially even run another motion if they were quick with it. And the same thing with the Jaden Ivey one. This is actually an example of what I would like to see them doing more of in terms of setting that high pick and roll, making sure they're getting into that motion early in the shot clock, making sure that they have that defensive mismatch happening, and that they get the defense rotating really, really early. However, what we saw is the lack of spatial awareness, the lack of awareness of the defense collapsing, and the decision to, again, try to kind of just ISO and bulldoze one's way through it, rather than recognizing that if there's this many white shirts around your player and yourself as a player, somebody is wide open, and that even if they're not going to be the one who takes the shot, the simple act of getting it to them and rotating it over to the next player will make the defense scramble, which means you have a lot of different opportunities to recognize where the defense is off. This is something that the Golden State Warriors do amazingly well, and it's something that I would like to see the Pistons do more, and after that, we can actually take a much closer look at their defense once they're not always on their heels. Anyways, if you're a Pistons fan, like the channel, subscribe. This channel is not only about Pistons stuff. If you want to take a look, I've got a few other topics. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're having a wonderful day.